The screen flickers to life. In one frame, Martin Sheen sits in a darkened room in Apocalypse Now, drenched in sweat, whispering about the horror. In another, his young son Charlie marches through the jungle in Platoon, the embodiment of America's fractured innocence. For a brief, glittering moment, the Sheens seemed destined for immortality, Hollywood's royal family, blessed with talent, charisma, and an almost mythic presence on screen. But then the image changes. Is 2011. Charlie Sheen, once the highest-paid actor on television, leans back in a chair, pupils dilated, a manic grin on his face. He mutters about tiger blood and winning, his words ricocheting across every television set and computer screen in America. The smirk that once symbolized charm now feels like the mask of a man unraveling. This is the story of the Sheens, a dynasty both exalted and cursed. Martin, the respected patriarch, who sacrificed his name to become a legend. Emilio Estevez, the proud son who refused the Hollywood machine and carved his own path. Charlie, the golden boy, who carried the family legacy higher than anyone dreamed, only to drag it down into chaos and scandal. Together, they were proof that Hollywood dynasties exist, and proof that they can collapse just as spectacularly. The Sheen family was never ordinary. Their lives unfolded not just on sets and stages, but in tabloids, courtrooms, and rehab clinics. Their triumphs were public. Their tragedies even more so. They weren't just actors, they were symbols of the best and worst of fame. Some called it ambition. Others called it addiction. The tabloids called it scandal. But to many, it became something darker, something whispered in the shadows of Hollywood, the Sheen Curse. Before there was a Sheen dynasty, there was a boy named Ramon Antonio Gerardo Estevez, born in 1940 in Dayton, Ohio. He was the son of Francisco Estevez, a Spanish immigrant who worked as a factory laborer, and Marian Phelan, an Irish woman who kept a household of 10 children afloat on very little money. The Estevez home was not a place of glamour. It was a place of grit, of discipline, of survival. Ramon grew up with the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, and the sense that life would not hand him anything. As a child, he was drawn to the stage. At Catholic school, he threw himself into plays, finding in acting both an escape and a purpose. His classmates saw him as intense, stubborn, and strangely magnetic for a boy his age. But when he announced that he wanted to become an actor, he was met with laughter. Dayton was not Hollywood. The son of a Spanish immigrant was not destined for stardom. Yet Ramon's determination only grew stronger. In the late 1950s, he left Ohio and headed east, chasing the impossible dream of becoming an actor. He enrolled in the theater scene in New York, working odd jobs to support himself. But he quickly discovered that talent was not enough. Casting directors took one look at his last name, Estevez, and dismissed him. Too ethnic, they said, too foreign. His dark features and Spanish surname closed doors before he even had a chance to read a line. It was then that Ramon made the decision that would define his life. Reluctantly, strategically, he reinvented himself. Ramon Estevez became Martin Sheen. He later admitted that he never legally changed his name. It remained Estevez on his passport, but on stage and screen, he was Sheen. The transformation worked. Suddenly, roles opened up. The young man who had been overlooked now had access to auditions, stages, and opportunities. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Martin Sheen was no longer a struggling actor. He was rising quickly, with roles on stage and television. His breakthrough came with Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, 1979, a film as cursed and chaotic in production as it was legendary in outcome. Playing Captain Benjamin, Willard nearly destroyed Sheen. He suffered a heart attack on set, endured brutal filming conditions in the Philippines, and poured every ounce of his soul into the performance. The result was a portrayal that critics hailed as one of the most haunting in cinema history. Martin Sheen had arrived, not just as a working actor, but as one of the most respected of his generation. At home, the Sheen family was growing. Martin and his wife Janet raised 4 children, Emilio, Ramon Jr., Renee, and Carlos, whom the world would later know as Charlie. They grew up in the glow of their father's career, surrounded by scripts, film sets, and the intoxicating allure of Hollywood. For them, acting was not just a dream, it was an inheritance. Each child approached that inheritance differently. Emilio refused to take the Sheen name, determined to succeed as Emilio Estevez. Ramon Jr. and Renee pursued quieter careers in film and television. But Carlos, bright, charming, magnetic, seemed destined to carry the torch higher than anyone else. He adopted the name Charlie Sheen, and from the very beginning, he had the swagger of someone born to be a star. The Sheens had become more than a family. They were a dynasty in the making, with Martin as the revered patriarch and his children ready to step into the limelight. But as history would prove, light this bright casts very long shadows. By the 1980s, the Sheens were no longer simply a family of actors. They had become a Hollywood institution. Each generation carved its own path, and for a brief, shining period, the name Sheen or Estevez was synonymous with power, versatility, and influence. Martin Sheen, the patriarch, had already secured his place in cinematic history. His haunting portrayal of Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now, 1979, had earned him critical acclaim, but Martin's career didn't stop there. He became a familiar face in American households with roles in films like Gandhi, 1982, Wall Street, 1987, where he shared the screen with his son Charlie, and later, television triumphs like The West Wing in the late 1990s. As President Josiah Bartlet, Martin embodied intelligence, compassion, and moral authority, making him not just an actor, but a cultural symbol of leadership. He was no longer only a performer, he was America's conscience on screen. Emilio Estevez, Martin's eldest son, was carving a different legacy. Refusing to take the Sheen name, Emilio proved that he could succeed without the family's Hollywood branding. He became a breakout star in the 1980s as a member of the Brat Pack, a group of young actors who defined a generation. His roles in The Breakfast Club, 1985, and St. Elmo's Fire, 1985, cemented him as a voice of youth culture. But Emilio wasn't satisfied with being just a teen idol. He stepped behind the camera, writing and directing films like Men at Work, 1990, and later Bobby, 2006, earning respect as a filmmaker with vision. Emilio's career may not have reached blockbuster heights, but it stood for independence, integrity, and artistry. And then there was Charlie, the youngest, the most magnetic, the one who seemed destined to surpass them all. Charlie Sheen's rise was meteoric. With Platoon, 1986, he became the face of America's reckoning with the Vietnam War. The film won Best Picture, and his performance as the conflicted soldier Chris Taylor turned him into Hollywood's golden boy. Just a year later, he reunited with Oliver Stone for Wall Street, 1987, playing Bud Fox opposite Michael Douglas's Gordon Gekko. Together, they captured the greed and ambition of the 1980s, and Charlie became the symbol of a generation torn between morality and success. By the end of the decade, Charlie Sheen was one of the most bankable actors in Hollywood. He balanced serious roles with comedic turns in Major League, 1989, and Hot Shots, 1991, proving his range and his charisma. He was charming, unpredictable, and endlessly watchable, the kind of actor who could carry both prestige dramas and box office comedies with ease. For a time, the Sheens had it all. Martin, the respected veteran. Emilio, the independent auteur. Charlie, the superstar whose smirk could light up a screen. They were Hollywood's royal bloodline, a dynasty that seemed untouchable. But dynasties in Hollywood rarely stay golden for long. For every accolade, for every box office triumph, there were whispers about Charlie's late nights, about his appetite for excess, about the volatility that lay just beneath his easy smile. The cracks were forming, even if the world didn't want to see them. The Sheens had reached the height of fame, and soon gravity would do what it always does, pull them down. At the turn of the 1990s, the Sheen dynasty appeared invincible. Martin's reputation was secure, Emilio had carved his own lane, and Charlie was riding a wave of stardom few young actors had ever achieved. But under the polished surface, the first signs of collapse were beginning to show, and inevitably, they centered on Charlie. Charlie's bad boy charm, once celebrated as part of his Hollywood appeal, began to drift into something darker. The tabloids thrived on his nightlife, the endless parties, the high-profile romances, the revolving door of supermodels and starlets. At first, this seemed like standard behavior for a Hollywood heartthrob. But soon, the headlines shifted tone. The excess wasn't glamorous anymore, it was alarming. In 1990, Charlie's name surfaced in the Heidi Fleisch scandal, linking him to Hollywood's underground network of escorts. He later admitted to spending tens of thousands of dollars, his private indulgences splashed across front pages. The revelations damaged his image, transforming him from the golden boy of Platoon and Wall Street into a man consumed by vice. The cracks widened in 1998 when Charlie nearly died of a cocaine overdose. For most actors, such an event would have forced a reckoning, a public fall from grace. But Charlie survived, both literally and professionally. Hollywood had always loved its rebels, and for a time, he seemed bulletproof. He would stumble, get clean, stumble again, and still land roles. Each near disaster was folded into the mythology of Charlie Sheen, the wild star who lived on the edge. But those closest to him saw the toll. Relationships fractured. Marriages collapsed. Allegations of violence and abuse began to follow his name. The charm that once made him magnetic now masked volatility that couldn't be contained forever. Meanwhile, Emilio quietly retreated from the spotlight, choosing smaller projects and stepping behind the camera. Martin, still a revered actor, threw himself into activism, perhaps in part to shield himself from the storm gathering around his youngest son. Yet the family could not escape the reality that Charlie's choices were becoming the defining story of the Sheen name. For Hollywood, it was easy to ignore the danger. Charlie still drew crowds, still sold tickets, still carried an aura of untouchable charisma. But the cracks were undeniable, and anyone paying attention could see them spreading. What began as whispers of scandal was becoming the roar of collapse. The Dynasty's Brightest star was burning too hot, and everyone knew what happens to stars that burn too hot for too long. By the late 2000s, Charlie Sheen had achieved what many thought impossible, a full career resurrection. After years of scandals, overdoses, and tabloid headlines, he found himself reborn as a television megastar. Cast as Charlie Harper in 2.5 Men in 2003, Sheen seemed to have stumbled upon the perfect role. The character was a wealthy, womanizing bachelor living in Malibu, a man whose life of indulgence, sarcasm, and irresponsibility mirrored Charlie's own reality. The audience loved it. Ratings soared. And once again, Charlie Sheen was Hollywood's golden boy, only now with a steady paycheck and a prime-time platform. For nearly a decade, 2.5 Men dominated American television. At its peak, it drew over 15 million viewers weekly, turning Sheen into the highest-paid actor on television. By 2010, he was reportedly making nearly $2 million per episode. The line between actor and character blurred completely. Charlie Harper was Charlie Sheen, and Charlie Sheen was Charlie Harper. The industry knew it, the public knew it, and Charlie himself embraced it. But behind the laughter, the storm was gathering. His addictions hadn't disappeared, they had simply been masked by the structure of a hit show and the machinery of a network determined to protect its cash cow. As the seasons rolled on, Sheen's behavior grew more erratic. He missed rehearsals, partied for days at a time, and cycled in and out of rehab. His co-stars and crew began to whisper about his reliability. Insurance companies questioned whether he was worth the risk. The tipping point came in 2011. After yet another stint in rehab, Sheen emerged not contrite, but defiant. He lashed out at Chuck Lorre, the show's creator, in interviews laced with insults and accusations. For CBS, it was the last straw. In March 2011, they fired their highest-paid star, cutting short one of the most lucrative contracts in television history. It was an extraordinary fall, the king of TV dethroned in an instant. But what followed was even more extraordinary. Instead of retreating, Charlie launched into a media blitz that became one of the most infamous meltdowns in entertainment history. Sitting in front of cameras, gaunt and wide-eyed, he unleashed a torrent of bizarre catchphrases. Tiger blood. Adonis DNA. I'm winning. His words were nonsensical, erratic, manic, and yet they were electrifying. Clips spread across television, YouTube, and social media at lightning speed. Within days, Charlie Sheen had gone from disgraced actor to viral sensation. The public couldn't look away. His rants were remixed into songs, turned into t-shirts, and quoted in offices and classrooms. He became both a punchline and a cultural phenomenon, one of the first celebrities to truly embody the viral age. But the fascination masked something darker. What millions were laughing at was the visible collapse of a man in crisis, unraveling in real time while the cameras rolled. Sensing an opportunity, Sheen tried to turn the chaos into a comeback. He launched a live stage tour, My Violent Torpedo of Truth/Defeat is Not an Option. The title itself was a reflection of his delusional bravado. Audiences packed theaters, expecting outrageous comedy. What they got instead was incoherent rambling, erratic storytelling, and awkward silences. Shows ended early. Crowds booed. Headlines declared the tour a disaster. What had been billed as a reinvention became a public humiliation. Meanwhile, his personal life was in ruins. Custody battles with ex-wives played out in the tabloids. Reports of drug binges with adult film stars dominated gossip columns. His family, who had once tried to shield him, were powerless to stop the spectacle. Martin Sheen, the respected patriarch, was left to watch his son's implosion unfold on every screen in America. Emilio Estevez, the quiet, disciplined brother, retreated further from the spotlight, unwilling to be dragged into the circus. The Sheen name, once a symbol of artistry and resilience, was now shorthand for scandal and excess. And then, in 2015, came the revelation that cemented the downfall. Charlie Sheen appeared on the Today Show and announced he was HIV positive, a diagnosis he had kept secret since 2011. The confession shocked the world. Lawsuits from former partners followed, accusing him of hiding his status. The same media that had laughed at his rants now turned on him with merciless headlines. The man who had once declared himself invincible, filled with tiger blood, was revealed to be vulnerable, ill, and deeply human. For Charlie, the contrast was devastating. At the height of his fame, he had been untouchable, the highest-paid actor in television, adored by millions. Now he was isolated, financially unstable, and professionally toxic. Hollywood abandoned him. Networks refused to insure him. His peers distanced themselves. The Sheen downfall wasn't just a collapse, it was a spectacle. It was the kind of fall only Hollywood could produce, the transformation of a man into a meme, of tragedy into entertainment. The Sheens had risen higher than almost any family in Hollywood, but by 2011, their dynasty was no longer defined by triumph. It was defined by Charlie's meltdown, the so-called Sheen Curse made visible to the world. The downfall was complete. The dynasty had cracked open for everyone to see. For Charlie Sheen, rock bottom wasn't one explosive crash. It was a slow, merciless unraveling, a steady descent into isolation that stripped him of the empire he once commanded. The HIV revelation in 2015 was the breaking point. The bravado of tiger blood and winning suddenly looked like what it truly was, a mask for fear, denial, and illness. Overnight, Charlie went from tabloid darling to public pariah. Lawsuits from former partners accused him of deceit. News anchors no longer laughed at his rants, they condemned him. The world that once turned his collapse into entertainment now turned on him entirely. Professionally, he became radioactive. Networks refused to insure him. Studios crossed his name off lists. No one wanted to touch the man who had once been television's highest-paid actor. Even his attempt at a comeback with Anger Management, a sitcom launched after his firing from 2.5 Men, fizzled out quickly. Hollywood had moved on, and Charlie was left behind. Financially, the decline was brutal. The millions he had made from 2.5 Men evaporated under the weight of lawsuits, child support, and his own extravagant spending. Reports surfaced that he was selling off properties, downsizing from the Malibu lifestyle that once mirrored his sitcom alter ego. The man who had embodied excess was now struggling to hold onto the remnants of his fortune. Personally, the devastation was even deeper. Marriages had collapsed in chaos, leaving a trail of bitterness and custody battles. His relationships with his children were strained, often mediated through courtrooms and legal documents. Friends distanced themselves. Allies in the industry went silent. The Sheen who once thrived on the spotlight now found himself alone, forced to face the silence he had always drowned in parties, interviews, and headlines. Meanwhile, the Sheen family name bore the weight of his implosion. Martin Sheen continued to command respect as a veteran actor and activist, but he couldn't shield himself from the questions about Charlie. Emilio Estevez had worked hard to step away from the family name, yet even his projects were overshadowed by his brother's collapse. The dynasty was fractured, its golden image shattered. Rock bottom wasn't just about scandal or illness. It was about erasure. Charlie Sheen, who once commanded more attention than any actor in Hollywood, was now a ghost in the industry. The phone didn't ring. The roles didn't come. The paparazzi who once stalked his every move had turned their lenses elsewhere. And that, perhaps, was the cruelest twist. For Charlie, attention had always been oxygen. Fame was both his crown and his curse. At rock bottom, even that oxygen was gone. The Sheen Curse had claimed its brightest star, leaving only a cautionary tale for the family, for Hollywood, and for the audience that once cheered him on. The Sheen saga is more than the story of one man's collapse. It is a reflection of how Hollywood builds legends, exploits them, and then discards them. For decades, the Sheens embodied both the promise and the peril of stardom. Martin Sheen rose from obscurity to become a respected actor of conscience. His career was proof that talent, discipline, and sheer will could carve out a place in an unforgiving industry. Emilio Estevez rejected the Hollywood machine and insisted on forging his own identity, refusing to take the Sheen name, and in doing so became a symbol of artistic integrity. These were triumphs, testaments to resilience and conviction. But Charlie Sheen's rise and fall revealed the darker truth. Hollywood loves a bad boy, until the bad boy stops being profitable. The industry indulged his excesses for years, writing them off as part of his charm. The media turned his addictions into punchlines, his meltdowns into memes. And audiences, millions of us, consumed it all. We laughed at Tiger Blood. We repeated winning. We bought tickets and tuned in, not realizing or not caring that what we were watching was a man spiraling toward ruin. The so-called Sheen Curse wasn't a family hex. It was the inevitable collision between extraordinary talent, personal demons, and a culture addicted to both building up and tearing down its icons. Hollywood crowned Charlie as its golden boy, and when he crumbled under the weight of that crown, the same system devoured him. The tragedy is that the Sheen name, once synonymous with artistry and grit, became shorthand for scandal. Martin's dignity, Emilio's independence, even the quieter pursuits of Ramon Jr. and Renee, none of it could eclipse the gravitational pull of Charlie's downfall. For the public, the Sheen dynasty is forever remembered less for its brilliance than for its collapse. And that is the real reflection. Fame is never neutral. It elevates and it consumes. It crowns and it curses. The Sheens gave us some of the most memorable performances of the last half-century. But they also gave us a reminder of how easily talent can be overshadowed, how quickly glory can curdle into tragedy. In the end, the Sheen Curse is not just about one family. It's about all of us, about what we expect from our idols, what we forgive, and what we turn into entertainment. The screen splits into three images. On the left, a young Martin Sheen in Apocalypse Now, drenched in sweat, whispering about the horror. In the center, Emilio Estevez in The Breakfast Club, quiet and determined, embodying the hope of a new generation. On the right, Charlie Sheen in 2011, wild-eyed in his infamous interviews, declaring he was winning, while the world laughed at his collapse. Three faces of the same dynasty: talent, resilience, destruction. The Sheens were once Hollywood's royal family. They had the lineage, the charisma, the brilliance. For a time, it seemed as though nothing could touch them. But Hollywood dynasties are fragile. They shine brighter than most, and because of that, they also burn faster. The world that lifted the Sheens up also reveled in tearing them down. Martin still stands as a figure of respect, Emilio as a symbol of quiet independence. But Charlie's implosion will forever define the family's legacy in the public eye. It is a reminder that fame is never a blessing without cost. It demands everything and gives nothing back when the lights dim. The Sheen Curse isn't supernatural. It's cultural. It's the curse of a spotlight that promises immortality but delivers ruin, the curse of an audience that craves both heroes and their destruction. The Sheens lived and paid that price in full view of the world. So the question lingers, was this family undone by their own choices or by the system that crowned them, consumed them, and left them broken? Was the Sheen Curse a family's tragedy, or was it Hollywood's design all along? Because in the end, under the spotlight, glory and ruin are never far apart. And for the Sheens, the curse was that they gave us both.